What's up, everyone? Welcome to Moments with the Marcelins. My name is Jun.
And my name is Stephanie.
Thank you for tuning in. This is the last episode for season 1.
I know, we got to the end.
We got to the end.
That's so awesome.
Of season 1.
Exactly.
Because we'll be right back next week. But I just we want to take the time out to just thank you all for the love and the support that you've shown throughout these past 10 weeks.
Yes.
For rocking with us. We really appreciate it and we do not take it for granted.
Absolutely. So this last episode, we had opened up the conversation to, everyone that we pretty much know. And we wanted to answer your questions in regards to dating relationships. So like anything that you had questions about. So we got a lot of good questions and we're going to answer each and every one of them on this episode.
I'm really excited about this episode because it's like, this is what you all want to hear. This is what you're asking and we get to talk about it.
Yes, of course. So we always want to preface, this is, based on our experiences. This is based on our opinion. But ultimately, we always go back to, what is healthy and what is, truth. So, we hope that your life is enriched by today's episode.
All right, let's get into it.
So the first one is, when did we know that we were the one for each other? So I do want to kind of preface this answer just by stating that June and I don't believe in the one, or that we don't believe in like you're out finding a soulmate per se. So the reason why is because the theory of the one or the soulmate is actually a Greek mythology theory where humans, and this is a theory, so you can even go on Google and figure it out, but humans were originally created based on this particular like mythological story, that humans were created, both men and women. They were like together in one body, and they had, they were connected. They had 4 arms, and 4 legs, and they had 2 different faces. And because of their power, Zeus felt that they were going to overcome. And so he split them and condemned them to forever try to find each other again. So because of that, obviously that is just a story, and somehow it just kind of found its way into some beliefs that people would just kind of strive for. So we don't believe in that, but we do believe that 2 people who want to be together, regardless of your background, your history, and everything, that they can be together and ultimately make it work. Back to the question as to when did we know that? For me, it wasn't a specific date and time, because I was even like trying to think about this, and I was like, was it a moment, or was it, a specific thing that happened? And for me, it wasn't that. I felt that gradually, as I began to know who he was, your passions, your vision, your calling, and kind of seeing all of that unfold, I felt that God, and I knew what God was doing in my life, that I saw how these like paths could merge to be ultimately what God had for our lives. And so for me, it was kind of that, I just, fell in love with who you were and all of that. So that's, for me, that's where I was like, okay, he is the one for me, because I can see how God's mission can just be all that it could be if we are together.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the characteristics that I was looking for in a woman was someone who was selfless, and I saw that in you. I saw how selfless you were with your family. I saw how you honored your parents, how good you were with my family. For me, that really stood out. You were smart, you were intelligent, you were intellectual, you cared for me, you were independent. I know you weren't trying to, I know you wasn't with me for my money, girl.
You're making me blush. You're so cute.
You were a godly woman. I saw how you cared for people and how you led, and, you're just a natural born leader, and so many just different qualities about you that I really admired. And I saw how our paths, kind of like to what you stated, could go and work together. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, you know what? I think this is it. So I can't really think of a moment per se, but those were some of the qualities about you that made me say, okay, let me put a ring on it.
All right. The next one is, if you could give one tip to a couple that is recently married, just one, what would it be and why?
I love this question because this person was specific. Just give us one. Okay.
Yeah.
Box me in. It's all right. For me, I would say embrace each season. Embrace each season. And what I mean by that is enjoy the moment that you are in. If you're a newlywed, enjoy that moment. If you're dating, enjoy that moment. Because oftentimes in society, it's like, okay, you guys are together. When are you going to get engaged? When you get engaged, when are you going to get married? When you get married, when are you going to have children? And so we're always rushing to get to a different stage per se, or a different season in our lives. And so the advice that I would give to someone that is recently married is enjoy this season.
Yeah.
Enjoy it. It's awesome. It's fun.
So for me, I would say that in any season, specifically obviously for the question of marriage, is that your marriage and your relationship will only be as strong and whole as you are individually. So this is something I learned fairly like a couple of weeks into marriage, just of how whole and healed I needed to be in order for my relationship to be all that I wanted it to be. And so I contribute to that. And so that's what I would say is that, you know, there is no perfect relationship, but there's definitely progress in relationship. And so if you have this idea of like, okay, this is where I would want us to be that person,
That's good.
you know, in that relationship that has those qualities. And therefore you help your partner, you know, get there as well.
I love that. The next question is, what's the secret to still going on dates while you are married? Another great question.
Yes.
For me, I would say establishing non-negotiables. And what I mean by that is literally putting in your calendar things that you want to do
That cannot be removed from the calendar.
that cannot be removed unless there's something catastrophic, God forbid,
Right.
that happens in your life. These are the things that you just have to do.
Yeah.
And that's
absolutely.
important. And I know in the beginning of our marriage, that was a little bit challenging
Yeah.
with ministry, with school, with all
We were
these
just
different
really
things that
busy
we
with-
had going
yeah.
on. And we were busy and we find ourselves doing all the work, but not really enjoying each other. And so, you know, really just making forth that effort to go out on dates.
Even if it's things at home that you just scheduled to do together. Because
Absolutely.
right now, obviously, with COVID, like there's some things that you just can't do because it's
Yeah.
closed or it's not, you know, some people may not feel safe. But you planning out those things at the beginning of the month, like, hey, this month we're going to do this together. And we cannot take that because that's a non-negotiable, because that's really important to
For
us.
sure.
The second thing I would probably say is, you know, honestly, don't stop the pursuit of each other.
That's so good.
I know that this can, and it may seem so cliche, but do the things that made you fall in love with each other, even when you're married.
Yeah.
Like, yes, you want because you have the person, but continue to win them. You know, I think that that's important. Like, you know, do things that you know that they enjoy. You know, if there's like a meal that they like, and that doesn't mean that you need to cook, but like, you know, take out. Like, we do that all the time. It's like, hey, I know you love this ice cream. I brought it for you. You know, hey, you bring me coffee in the morning. You know what I mean? You buy me something a little cute just because you were thinking of me. It's a continual pursuit of each other.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be even spending money, writing a cute little note, sending them a text message throughout the day, you know, or something along those lines, that you continue the pursuit of each other.
Next question. How important is it for guys to have your guy time and girls to have your girl times while you are married?
This is very important. Even though you're married, I think it's vital for everyone to understand that you are still two individuals. You're in this marriage together, and yes, you are one, but you are two individuals. Even if you're dating, like, yes, you guys are together and you guys are, you know, maybe committed to each other, but you're two different individuals. And that needs to be respected and celebrated.
So good.
And so because of that, you know, you need to do things that you enjoy, and I need to do things that I enjoy. And it's maybe not always, you know, hanging out with people or whatever, but sometimes, you know, that self-care that is important to you, because again, I'm an individual and I enjoy that, and that needs to be celebrated. Sometimes I think that when you are in a relationship, it's so easy to try to have the other person be a little bit more like you, or try to like ultimately always have like the same, you know, desires, and always like think the same way, and always try to be like this one person, but you can't do that. Like,
Right.
you and I are completely different people,
Night and day.
completely different, and
Hot and cold.
black and white, right? Or whatever. Anyways, but within that, we celebrate each other's individuality. And therefore, I know that there's things that you need to do, which, can even be hanging out with your boys. That's important to you. I'm not a boy. I'm not your dude. So I cannot expect for me to give you everything that your boys are going to give you. You know what I'm saying? Like that fellowship and that, talking about sports or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
That, again, is what you need.
You touch on a great point when you say that our individuality should be celebrated as well as respected, because I think in the dating phase, we love, or, even in the getting to know each other phase, you love the differences about an individual, but it seems as if even before marriage, that as time progresses, without even realizing, oftentimes you're trying to morph someone into how you would want them to be. And you got to be very careful when doing that and understanding and respecting that someone is different.
Yep.
And that should be celebrated, and that should also be respected. I think for me, when it comes to this question, I'm the best version of myself when I'm practicing self-care.
Yeah.
So if I'm working out, if I'm going outside for a walk and just enjoying nature, if I'm finding time in creative spaces to just be myself, and if I'm hanging out with friends, if I'm watching sports and, talking about battle rap with my homeboys and all these different things, that for me is great. And I know that you're not really into those things, and that's okay.
Exactly.
And
like,
that's
there's
okay.
absolutely nothing
but
wrong with that.
But I have my boys that I can do that with. And so I'm the best version of myself when I have that time. It's better. It's better. Like, how was it with the guys? Or
Absolutely.
how was it with the girls? Like, let me miss you. You know what I'm saying? And so, yeah.
I think that that's so good. Awesome. The next question is, how can a person be intentional about fair fighting in their marriage? And I even want to add, like, even in your relationship. So fair fighting is a healthy way to talk about issues. I know that many of us maybe grew up in homes where it was toxic, the conflict was from 0 to 100 pretty much. And, you and I don't have to follow those same patterns. And so with fair fighting, there's some rules, and I just kind of want to outline some of those here. So before you even begin to talk and discuss, those things that are in your heart. So the first thing is that before you even begin to share how you are feeling or what is going on, make sure that you understand why you feel upset. Sometimes we feel like, I'm just mad, but what are you actually mad about? Like, what is it that has your blood boiling or, made you feel sad or something like that in regards to it? The second one is choose to discuss one thing at a time.
Amen.
So this is where I know I've been guilty of it, where we want to talk about something and I have all my bullet points of like everything that happens in that day or that week. No, talk about one incident. Talk about and choose one thing, and this is, for example, like, don't say, hey, you left the dishes there for, and you said that you were going to wash them, but then last week you also, left food all over the couch and you didn't put your shoes away, or whatever the case may be. Don't bring that laundry list of things. Really choose one thing that you want to address, and therefore you bring up that one thing.
That's good. I think another thing is no degrading language. Yeah. Like, attack the issue and not the person. So don't put someone down. No swearing, no name calling. No, don't use any degrading language to make your point. You can be clear with your point without putting someone down or belittling someone. And so that is so important. The next thing is express your feelings with words. So an example is, I feel hurt when you ignore my phone calls, instead of making an absolute statement such as, you always ignore my phone calls. Or you made me feel, because again, I'm in control over my emotions. I'm in control over my feelings. No one can offend me without my consent. And a response is always better than a reaction. The next thing would be take turns speaking. Make sure that we're both being able to hear each other clearly when we're having a fair fight. And I'm not just, talking the whole time and monopolizing the conversation, taking over the conversation and then ending the conversation. No, communication goes both ways.
Yeah. And sometimes if you feel that you have a hard time doing this, because I know sometimes you all know those people in your life that are listening to respond instead of listening to understand. And so they want to like cut you off and just like interject everything that you're saying. Sometimes it may be as simple as like, you have 2 minutes to speak and then I'll speak for 2 minutes. So time yourselves. Or another option could be like, hey, whoever has the remote gets to speak, you know, and therefore whoever's next can then speak, because I know there's, you know, some individuals that it's tough for them to kind of take turns in talking because you want to get your point across.
Yeah, as crazy as that sounds, like therapists do these type of things with couples,
right,
because you have to learn, you have to start somewhere.
Right.
And that's very key and important, to make sure that you take turns speaking, and when you're listening, to listen to actually understand where your partner is coming from, and not necessarily listening to respond. Like we always say, have a posture of curiosity instead of one of critique.
Yeah. Another thing is always to set ground rules in regards to no yelling or no stonewalling. So no yelling obviously is, you know, there's no need to raise your voice in regards to anything. And then no stonewalling is basically, you know, you completely retreating from the conversation, and then, you know, you kind of get the silent treatment, you know. So those are important ground rules to share. If you do feel that the conversation does get heated, this is where you guys may need to practice a timeout. And this is very effective because, you know, you can come back at a later time when you guys and the emotions are kind of, you know, not as high after you've cooled down, to then, you know, go back in and discuss what you guys were sharing.
And lastly, I would say attempt to come to a compromise on understanding.
Yeah.
You two individuals are never going to agree on everything, and that is okay. But I think it's important to make sure that you can come to a compromise on understanding, or sometimes it's just agreeing to disagree.
Yeah, right.
And that is okay.
But at least you know where your partner is coming from in that regard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the next question we have is, what's more romantic, communicating needs or mind reading, or both?
I love this question.
This was a very interesting question, but when I understood what was being asked, I was like, this is a great question. And I first want to start off by saying that we are not mind readers.
Right.
Only God knows the thoughts and the hearts of individuals without asking, because he is omniscient, which means that he is all knowing. A psalm, one of the many verses that prove this, is found in Psalms 139:4, where it says, even before there is a word on my tongue, behold, Lord, you know it all. And we need to understand that it's not fair to expect someone to know what you don't communicate.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think for me, it's more sexy that you tell me what you want and what you need than for me to just try to guess all the time, you know, because that allows for clear expectations on both sides. Communication is key, you know, and you knowing what they like and therefore what they need. You can be intentional, you can be creative, and you can love them in that way. But it cannot happen first without that being communicated, because unmet expectations lead to frustration.
It's so good.
So if my expectation is always like, yo, he needs to know to always bring me coffee in the morning, if I've never shared that with you, you can't love me in that way.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? It's great for you to be maybe spontaneous with that, or be cute with it, or you know that I'm having a rough day and you like do something nice for me. But at least I've shared that with you, that, hey, I like that. But I can't assume for you to guess every thought or anything like that. You know what I'm saying? It's unfair to you, and it puts you at a disadvantage in our relationship.
Next question is, reasons why to not date someone only because they are Christian. This is a good question as well. I do want to say that being Christian shouldn't be the only criteria for being in a relationship with another individual. Christianity doesn't necessarily mean compatibility. And so it's important that we pay close attention to patterns.
Absolutely.
You know, oftentimes we look at potential, but we overlook patterns. No, look at those patterns. If there are red flags, jot those things down. And if this is something that continues, a conversation needs to be had. But, just because someone is a Christian doesn't necessarily mean that they're compatible for you.
Right.
And that is okay, because sometimes people have different views, values, and where they want to be at in life. And so I would recommend you really do your research on an individual, get to know that individual, and don't just, commit to someone just because they're Christian.
Yeah, Christianity doesn't absolve you of your humanity. So they're still human. Like, they still have behaviors, patterns, likes, wants, desires that may not align with your own. And as long as your foundation is the same, and I know we talked about this in our last episode, that sometimes like you need to talk about like, what guides your compass in regards to your, your direction in life, where you get your ideas and your theories and ideals, they're going to be different even if you're both a Christian. So make sure to always have the same values and beliefs, which I think that's important. But just because they say that they're Christian doesn't mean that they just may not. You guys may not be compatible, and that's okay. So the next one is it okay to check on your spouse when they go out? So our model is not the way, but it's a way. We have both agreed that we're okay with checking in on each other when we arrive somewhere and when we're leaving. And if there has been maybe a gap in time where we haven't like heard from each other, we just kind of check in and see if you're okay. You know what I'm saying? Like, hey, is everything going okay, or different things like that. We've agreed on that. And so therefore we check in on those points just to, again, make sure that everything is good. And therefore I know like, hey, he's on his way home. So if something happens, and, then I can just be aware of that.
You make a good point. That's what works for us. Every relationship looks different, which leads me to the next question. What is an appropriate time for a partner to come home from hanging out with friends? Ooh.
Yeah. So this is something we always like to share, is that every relationship will develop its own culture. And every relationship is different because there's different expectations and there's different things that you accept and tolerate. Not everyone's the same. And so within that, you really develop that culture of what is acceptable or not. And if it is an issue that, hey, your partner is coming home at a late time, or your partner goes MIA for a certain amount of time and you're just, you haven't heard back from them, I think it's important to communicate those things. If it happens, it makes me feel like this. And so again, for me, it's not really just an appropriate time because it varies with everyone. But it's important for you guys to communicate that and come to a mutual decision based on, again, understanding and what is best for your relationship.
The next question is, what are some communication do's and don'ts? The first thing I would say when communicating, one of the most important aspects of communication is to listen. Listening is an indication of how much you love your partner, how much you have respect for them. Part of this is making sure that you're paying attention, that you're actively listening, not interrupting them. Also creating space where there are no interruptions, and creating that time and that space to communicate with one another.
Yeah, I think another communication do is to speak clearly, to use I statements like I feel like instead of you always, or use those, absolute statements. And then from there, the next one is also to reiterate what is being said to ensure that you are understanding what is being communicated to you. Just go back and be like, hey, I heard you say this, because sometimes the communication can be completely missed because I heard something different than what you originally said. The next communication do is to learn to be on the same level sometimes. And there's two levels. There's the heart level and there is the head level. So for example, I may sometimes be communicating to you at a heart level. And so what I am asking is for you to communicate back to me at a heart level.
Can you give an example?
Of course. So your heart level is kind of like your feelings, your frustrations, your, those heart needs. And so I'm communicating to you, hey, you know what? Today I felt like this at work, and I was just overwhelmed and it was tough or anything like that. I don't expect for you to communicate back to me at a head level, which is basically your facts, your opinions, and your suggestions. So you should be like, hey, you should just go look for another job. I don't need that right now. You should communicate back to me.
And I will say I've been guilty of that.
Yeah.
And I always tell you, charge it to my head and not my heart. Because usually as a guy, I'm trying to fix it.
Yes,
And so,
exactly. And so sometimes it's just that communication, knowing where it's coming from. Now, if I say, hey, I have an idea on something, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts? Then I want you to communicate back to me at a head level. So like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Yes, that can work. Or no, how about tweak this or whatnot? And therefore we're communicating at the same level, because at first I may be sharing my heart. I want you to share your heart, or sometimes your head, and then I want you to communicate back to me in that same way.
some don'ts in communication. Don't make assumptions.
Yes, assumptions is the lowest form of knowledge, okay? It's not based on anything but thin air.
Avoid interruptions. If you need clarification on something, politely ask your partner to explain what it is that they're trying to convey to you. Don't use your phones. Don't be on any electronic devices. That is a big pet peeve for any relationship, I can imagine, if you're trying to
Communicate correctly, yeah.
Also, don't monopolize the conversation. Don't take over the conversation when communicating. Someone comes to you about something and you just making everything about you. Like, conversations go both ways. Communication goes both ways. And so keep that in mind when communicating with your partner. And lastly, when it comes to communication of a don't bombard your partner with a million different things. It can be overwhelming.
Yeah, and that's why, going back to for fighting, bring up one issue. What is that one thing that you do want to ultimately bring a resolution to? So the next question is, what can I do to not rub my emotional baggage on my partner? I think this is a great question as well. So I think, first of all, it's important for you to have an awareness of what actually is your emotional baggage, or what are those things that you feel like you are currently carrying, and also have realistic expectations as to what your partner is there for in relation to your emotional needs. So, for example, my partner is there to support me. They're not there to fix my emotional issues or whatever I am dealing with emotionally.
Preach.
I'm there to hear you. I'm there to hold your hand, be your shoulder to cry on, rub your back if I need to, but I'm not there to fix how you feel, because that's your responsibility. And so having those clear expectations, I think, is important. From there, what are you doing to grow in those areas? What are you doing? Because ultimately, what we want to get to is that I do not need to always have the same emotional baggage. I don't always need to be carrying that weight around. So, what am I doing to improve in those areas? Do I have a mentor, a counselor, a therapist, a friend that I am going to kind of speak on those things? And therefore, there is that progress in my life.
And to kind of go along with what you said, as far as your partner being there to support, is speaking to your partner about what are those emotional baggages that you deal with. I think when you're in a relationship, it's important to be vulnerable and transparent when you feel safe to do so. Again, when you feel safe to do so, because that person is supposed to be there to support you. And if there's anything that is triggering that, or if you're feeling some type of way, to, explain that, or let your partner know, so they can do what they need to do to support you. Again, not to fix your issue, but to support you while you're going through what you're going through.
The next one is how to set up the B word, boundaries. So first of all, your boundaries are always going to be based off your beliefs, your values, and your priorities. And that's something you both have to decide first for yourselves, and then communicate that with each other, because sometimes you might have different priorities and, beliefs and values, hopefully not too far off, but therefore you can come together and therefore speak on that. I do want to share 4 boundaries. There's a lot of boundaries that you guys can set together, but 4 main ones right now are your emotional boundary, physical boundary, digital boundary, and also conflict resolution boundaries. So with emotional boundaries are things just to kind of ensure that you all have a safe and comfortable relationship based on the premise of trust. So how we continue to, trust each other and therefore have in a safe environment to share our emotions. The other one is your physical boundary. So how far you're going to go or not going to go in your relationship. We do believe that you should remain abstinent until you're married. And therefore, if that's one of your beliefs as well, you're going to do things in order to protect that. So that can be, let's not stay in the car so late, or, let's go out in groups sometimes, and different things like that, or even have boundaries with the type of conversations that may lead to something physically as well. And ultimately, again, your boundaries are based on your values, your beliefs, and your priorities. So you guys talk about that and therefore make decisions based on that as well. The next one is digital. So this is where you guys determine as a couple how comfortable you are about being public about your relationship on any social platform. So obviously we live in a digital social era. So this sometimes is a conflict for some couples because there's unrealistic expectations on that public relationship.
That's a controversial one for a lot of
people. It is. But that's why you guys have to talk about it. It's important for you guys to decide what is that, and therefore communicate to each other as well as to what kind of access you're wanting to have on each of your personal devices when you guys are at that level that you feel like it's important for there to be either transparency or not. Again, every culture is different, every relationship is different, and therefore you guys build upon that.
Another thing for boundaries is, how are you all going to resolve your conflicts? I cannot stress this enough, how important this is to talk about and to have boundaries for. Because how we were raised have a profound impact sometimes on how we respond to conflict. For us, we're not going to raise our voices at one another when we try to resolve conflict. We're also not going to talk about our conflict in front of our friends or family members because you know what? It's between the two of us. And so we're going to talk about it. And we're going to solve it together. We're not going to invite someone who is just on our side to make our point, I think anytime it's you need an outside person to, mediate that. That should be a therapist. That should be
a mentor,
a counselor, someone who is objective and someone who wants to see you both win.
Right.
And that's important. So the next question is, how can we be on the same page as a couple? This is a good question. I think check-ins are important. Creating a space to hear each other out on what is good in the relationship and what can use some work. We call this heart talks. And so this is where we get together and we just have a conversation and we ask each other, hey, how are you doing? What are some areas you feel that I can improve on, or vice versa? Or how do you feel the relationship is going? How is your love tank right now? And so really just kind of having these conversations. What are you still thinking about in the next 5 years? Just different conversations like that, talking about the future, talking about the present, talking about what can be improved.
Talking about current issues that are happening.
Right.
Absolutely. I think that's important. Yeah. And there might be moments, situations, and even topics where, quite frankly, you might not be on the same page about, and in these moments, allow yourself the time to really just try to hear each other out before trying to push an idea, or this is how I think about it and you should think about this way too, because ultimately maybe that person's not there yet. Maybe that person might not really ever get there. But again, allowing them that free space and safe space to share how they feel, and ultimately in due time, you guys can come down to a mutual agreement as well.
I think it's also a testament of God working in your character to place people in your life who think differently than you and see how you can adapt and how can you adjust to it. And it's not always easy.
No. Iron sharpens iron. Absolutely. So the next question is, can you identify toxic behaviors and how to respond to them? So there may be a couple of more toxic behaviors. We did want to outline just some of the main ones that we know can have significant impacts on your relationship. So the first one is being secretive. And this is basically someone who is very, very, very closed off. They do not want to share, even with someone who they're in a relationship with, things about their own personal life. How do you respond to someone who is very secretive, has a very hidden life? So first of all, communication. Always asking the question and coming from a posture of curiosity. Hey, why is it that you don't share these things? Give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they don't feel safe enough to share. Maybe they've never shared or had someone to share them with. Now, if this continues, there could be other outlining things in regards to them not wanting to bring you on into those areas of their life, which, you can definitely talk about at that time. But first, always think about it from the benefit of the doubt.
The next type of toxic behavior is verbal or physical abuse. How to respond to that? I would I would tell you to exit that relationship anytime someone is being physical or verbal abusive. My reason for that is your safety is most important before you being in a relationship. And so if your life is being threatened, you need to make sure that you get out of that, and that you get out of that now. Abuse isn't just physical, it's verbal as well. You know, manipulation and control. Emotionally. And so you should not have to succumb to that for anyone. Get out of that. Find a therapist, a professional who can assist you. The next type of toxic behavior is someone who always has to be right or have the last word. I think if you're the partner of the individual who always has to be right or have the last word, it's important to communicate that to them, and also communicate how that makes you feel, because this sometimes can be a blind spot for individuals. But letting them know, hey, it's not about winning the argument and losing the person, because if you lose the person, then what good is it if you won the argument? And so really just expressing that to your partner and working on that together, because that communication is key. And it's not always about who's right and who's wrong, but how we can work together to make this thing work.
Absolutely. The next one is someone who doesn't ever want to talk through or resolve issues. Just because you brush something under the rug doesn't make the issue go away. And so these are going to be continual things that are going to surface and come up. And therefore, the way that you respond to that is finding out why it is that they avoid conflict. Is it because they don't know how to resolve conflict in a healthy way? Is it because they don't see, what the issues really are? And therefore, sometimes even having a mediator to assist in having those difficult conversations. The next one is someone who doesn't respect boundaries. So we are really true believers of, boundaries are important in every relationship. And we talked about some earlier, but there's other boundaries as well that, may again even harm you as an individual. So if those boundaries aren't being, respected, first, verbalize it. And then secondly, depending on the type of boundary it is, there may need to be difficult decisions that you make as a person, because again, some of these boundaries may be crucial to your safety and your health, emotionally, mentally, and physically.
The next question is, what are some things that you would have prepared better for during dating? For me, I would say self-care, making sure that I was in a good place mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and not being codependent on you to do that or fulfill that void. I think it's important that as individuals, we make sure that we're whole, that we make sure that we're good and we're responsible for our emotions. And I know that's something that we've kind of reiterated a couple of times, but that is so important that June can be okay if she isn't. And so for me, self-care is very important, because I'm the best version of myself when I am taking care of myself.
Absolutely. The second, the thing for me, it would probably be to have a better pulse of where my heart is in regards to probably previous trauma, hurts, and pains that ultimately will continue to follow you even into, your relationship status changing. Just because you get married doesn't make issues go away. They only sometimes magnify. So if you have trust issues now, if you have doubts and fears now, to address those before moving on into, a more serious relationship, because again, they're not going to go away and you got to address them.
Well, that was such a great conversation.
Yes.
I hope we were able to answer your questions and that you had a clear understanding. If not, DM us. But thank you again, y'all, for rocking with us these past 10 episodes. We did it. We made it through season 1.
Yes.
We love y'all.
Get ready for season 2.
Yes.
It's gonna be crazy.
Season 2 is going to be lit. We love y'all. Take care. God bless. And much love.